I am the Superflip, a professional speedcuber, and today I'll be trying out the autocomplete interview. So what speedcubing means is that I competitively solve Rubik's Cubes, and I try to solve them as fast as I can. And today, I'm going to try to answer some of these common questions about Rubik's Cubes that appear on Google. So first, let's deal with the category of what is. So first, what is a speed Rubik's Cube? So a speed Rubik's Cube, or what we typically call a speed cube, is a Rubik's Cube that is designed to be able to turn very quickly so that you can solve it as fast as possible. For example, what I have here right now is a speed cube, and the design might look quite different from what you're used to. For example, the corners are rounded, it's significantly lighter than most normal cubes, and the internal piece design is also a lot different than a standard cube. All of this is to ensure that the turning is smooth, and also that we can do things such as corner cutting, which is the ability to turn a layer without it being completely aligned, like this. These properties help it to not explode and not lock up when we're turning fast. Speedcubing technology is very similar to phones or really any modern tech. There are constantly improvements, maybe a release every year, such as magnets to auto-align pieces, or even having MagLev in a core, which is the same technology that they use in the world's fastest trains. What is the Rubik's Cube world record? Of course, there are many Rubik's Cube variants, such as the 2x2, 4x4, and so on, but for the 3x3, as of December 2024, the fastest single solve is 3.13 seconds by Max Park. Now, this record is one that is approved by the World Cube Association, which is the organization that regulates and holds Rubik's Cube competitions, but there also have been faster solves done, including some solves under 3 seconds by various people. What is the biggest Rubik's Cube? So this question can be read in two different ways. If we're talking about, the literal largest 3x3 puzzle, that would go to a 3-meter Rubik's Cube, which was created by the Dubai Knowledge Park, and it looks absolutely insane. I would love to go to see it in person. However, if we're talking about the largest puzzle, as in how many pieces there are on the puzzle, or in other words, the highest order puzzle, well, there's a bit of a progression there too. Largest puzzle that the WCA recognizes in competitions is the 7x7, which means there are 7 pieces across one side of the cube. But the largest mass-produced puzzle that you can purchase is actually 3 times larger than that at the 21x21 made by the company MoYu. But even that isn't it. The world record for the largest puzzle ever created is the 49x49, broken just this year, consisting of a whopping 13,827 pieces. Now, while in theory you can create a cube that is infinitely large, it'd be extremely difficult, and there would have to be many manufacturing tricks that you have to use to ensure that it works, such as how there's a curve across the pieces on the 49x49 to allow all of the pieces to fit. Now, truth is that when it comes to solving these larger puzzles, the actual difficulty doesn't go up by much as you get to more and more pieces. It's more or less the same method that you would use to solve a 4x4 or a 5x5, but it obviously does get a lot more tedious as the number of layers goes up. Our next category is how. So first off, how does a Rubik's Cube work? So I guess we're getting into more of the complicated questions now. But the basic idea behind a Rubik's Cube is that we have individual pieces such as this corner or this edge, which are locked around a core. So the core holds each of these 6 faces together. Now, on each of these 6 faces, we also have a centerpiece, which are held down into the core, which is at the center, by typically a screw. And because we want the pieces to have a little bit of give so that they come back together and not be completely floppy, there is typically a spring underneath the screw to keep the pieces all nice and held together. That description was extremely simple and definitely does not do all of the cube manufacturers justice, but it is extremely difficult to create a working cube, much less one that is able to withstand extremely fast turning. And much of this comes down to the way that the pieces are designed. Sometimes even a millimeter difference in any of the pieces can make a large difference when it comes to the way that it turns. How many combinations does the Rubik's Cube have? The Rubik's Cube has over 43 quintillion combinations, and if you haven't heard of the word quintillion, neither have I until I started cubing. So essentially what a quintillion is it's 1 followed by 18 zeros, and 43 quintillion would be 43 followed by 18 zeros. And that is literally more than the number of stars in the observable universe. So it is really, really hard to imagine this big of a number. And the easiest way to get to this number is to calculate a few simple things about the edges and corners. It is a little bit mathy, but I'll try to keep this quick. Let's start with the 8 corner pieces. When we're choosing where they can go, the first one has 8 choices, the second one has 7, and so on, giving us a total of 8 factorial corner positions. Now each corner can be oriented in 3 ways, which means we can twist them in 3 ways, except for the last one, because the orientation of the last corner is determined by the orientation of the other 7. So in total for the corners, we have 8 factorial times 3 to the 7th. Now we can apply similar argument for the edges, 12 factorial permutations, and 2 to the 11 orientations, because the last edge depends on the other 11 edges. And now multiply them together, and it seems like we're done, but we still have to divide by 2. And the reason why here is a bit complicated, but essentially half of the cases are invalid due to how certain arrangements of edges and corners are simply not possible. This is otherwise known as parity. And if you calculate that out, you should get to 43 quintillion. How to solve a Rubik's Cube. Now, obviously, this is a really involved question, and I can't answer the whole thing here, but essentially, there are multiple ways that you can actually solve a Rubik's Cube. When you first start learning how to solve a cube, you mostly learn what is known as layer by layer, or LBL. So instead of the common misconception that you solve a Rubik's Cube side by side, we actually start from the bottom and work our way layer by layer up to the top until the entire thing is solved. While this is the method that you will probably learn when you first start learning cubing, for speed cubing, there are also 3 main methods that we can use, known as CFOP, RU, and ZZ. The most popular way by far is CFOP, so I'll quickly go over how that works. CFOP stands for cross, F2L, OLL, and PLL, which just so happens to be 4 steps in this cubing method. The first step that we have to do is to create a cross on the bottom of our cube, and that looks something like this. As you can see, we have a T shape with the white pieces, as well as the color on the side of the white pieces matching with the color of the corresponding center. The next step is known as F2L. In F2L, we have to solve each of these 4 sets of edges and corners to solve the first 2 layers of our Rubik's Cube. And this step is quite heavy on intuition, but with a little bit of practice, it is not too bad. Here's what F2L looks like in action. The next step, which is known as OLL, involves using one algorithm to get all of the yellow pieces on top, to get something like this. Now that the yellow side is solved, we have one last step, which is known as PLL. And in order to do PLL, we have to fix the positions of all of the pieces here, and again, we can do this in one algorithm. As you can see, our entire cube is now solved with CFOP. How do Rubik's Cube algorithms work? So in a method that I described before, there were many steps that I've simply just said use an algorithm on. But what really is an algorithm? So in cubing, we typically define an algorithm as a series of moves that you can do around a cube that simply moves or orients pieces around on the Rubik's Cube. For example, let's take a look again at PLL. When we want to move these pieces around on the last layer, we're going to have to use an algorithm. In this case, based on the pattern of the pieces around the cube, I can identify that this is a Y-perm, which switches this edge with this edge and this corner with this corner. Now, most algorithms you have to memorize, but we typically use what is known as muscle memory. So instead of literally memorizing every single move, you kind of train yourself until it becomes natural to do a certain set of moves when you see a specific case. So for example, for this Y-perm, I can quickly get it to the solved state. Now, finding these algorithms is not a simple task, especially if you want that algorithm to be able to be executed quickly and efficiently. These algorithms used to be found by just trying combinations of moves by hand, but these days, computers also help accelerate the process. Now let's get into the category of can. Can you take apart a Rubik's Cube? Of course you can. Remember how the cube is just a bunch of pieces attached around a core. If you do try hard enough, it is possible to take it apart. Most of the time we have to take it apart on purpose to lubricate the inside of the cube, or occasionally we also unintentionally pop it, where a piece comes out if we're turning too fast. However, fixing a pop or fixing a taken apart Rubik's Cube is also pretty easy. All you have to do is put the pieces back where they belong. The last one might be slightly harder to push in, but eventually it will all come back together and you didn't really break anything. Can you solve a Rubik's Cube one side at a time? So the short answer here is no, as in it's very difficult to do so. Many people who start cubing will try to do this, but while it might seem like the right way at the start, it's much easier to work layer by layer like I showed, working from the bottom to the top. The longer answer is technically you can solve it side by side, although it will require much more skill and different algorithms than something like layer by layer. So instead of it being a, beginner method, it'd be more of an advanced method and not a very efficient one at that. Can a Rubik's Cube be solved in 2 moves? So a lot of YouTube videos out there have been showing how you can simply solve a Rubik's Cube by only turning 2 sides like this. And no, that is just absolutely false. Now what is true is that if you go from a solved state like I had and repeat those 2 moves continuously, you will eventually get back to solved state again. In the case of these 2 moves, it requires a lot of time to get back to solved state. However, if you start from any other scramble, it will not work. So for example, I have a random scramble here. Let's see what happens if we do these 2 moves. The simplest way to prove that this doesn't work is by doing these 2 moves. It will always only change the pieces on this side or on this side. These pieces down here will never get affected by the algorithms. And thus, because these pieces are scrambled, they will never be solved by doing these 2 moves. So that myth is just completely busted. But while repeating 2 moves to solve the cube isn't possible, mathematicians have also raised the question of whether it will be possible to complete a Rubik's Cube merely by repeating a single algorithm over and over again. And as it turns out, that algorithm does exist in theory. Although, in order to execute it once, it will take an absurdly long time. And in order to solve the cube, you're going to have to repeat up to 43 quintillion times. So TLDR, no, it is not possible to solve the cube by repeating one algorithm, at least in our lifetimes. Can a Rubik's Cube become unsolvable? Yes, a cube can become unsolvable, and the easiest way to do this is by twisting a corner like this. And when we say unsolvable, it simply means unable to be restored to the solved state where all of the sides are the same color. So no matter how you turn this, you're not going to be able to untwist this corner just by turning the sides of the cube. The only way to fix the corner twist is, well, to twist it back. Now in speed cubing, the WCA is clear that twisting corners intentionally is not allowed. However, due to how many cubes are really loose, it sometimes happens on accident. So when you're turning really fast, a corner just twists, and the competitor is allowed to twist the corner back if that ever happens. Now there are also many other complicated ways to make a cube unsolvable. Most of them require taking a cube apart. So for example, if you swap 2 centers, it will become unsolvable. If you flip an edge, much like how you can twist a corner, it will also become unsolvable, and so on. Finally, let's get into the why category. First, why is it called a Rubik's Cube? Well, Rubik's Cubes were originally created by Erno Rubik in 1974, but they were simply called Magic Cubes. It was later renamed to the Rubik's Cube almost as a marketing move by a company, and today it is still known as such. Now, one misconception that I want to address here is that Rubik's brands are the only good Rubik's Cubes out there. Now, while it is the original, Rubik's brand cubes are not meant for speed cubing, and there are many other brands such as MoYu and GAN that create much better speed cubes, some even for a similar price or less. And related to that topic, why are Rubik's Cubes so expensive? So first, if you don't know, there are many brands today for speed cubes like I've mentioned, and for a good one, the prices range all the way from about $7 to up to $100. And while that might sound crazy to think that a simple puzzle, or some might even say toy, to be so expensive, due to all of the advanced technology in the cube, it is technically not unreasonable for a cube to be around $50 or $60. Now, $100 might be a bit of a stretch, but hey, companies gotta make a profit somehow. Why is Rubik's Cube, or why are Rubik's Cubes so popular? Honestly, it's hard to give a single answer as to why the cube is so popular. It is an amazing puzzle that has captivated people for so many years, both as something interesting to solve, and even in a realm of speed cubing to solve faster and faster. Today, there are so many people just discovering the mystery of Rubik's Cube and trying to solve it for the first time, while simultaneously there are people out there breaking new world records for solving one in literally a couple of seconds. So, in summary, perhaps the cube is so popular because there's something magical both in the first time you solve it and the millionth time you solve it. And if you haven't experienced the Rubik's Cube yet, now's as good as a time as any. So on that note, I think it's time to end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.